Welcome to our final video lesson on processing text and corpora. Today, we wrap up by looking at a concrete example of corpus-based research. Your task will be to evaluate this example using a peer assessment grid. The piece of work that you will work with is entitled Semantic Prosody and Near Synonyms, a Cross-Linguistic Study. It is actually a long abstract that I submitted for a course in Linguistics for Translation which I took during my master's degree. We were asked to research a topic of interest, carry out a small-scale study using corpora, and report on it in detail. The first step when starting your research is choosing a topic. There are many ways to find a topic that feels meaningful to you, from recommended readings through classroom activities and discussions to your interests outside of the class, such as music, TV series, and politics. In my case, inspiration came from one of the course's reference books, Corpus Linguistics by McHenry and Hardy. Introductory books like this one often include overviews of the field and discussions of the current state of research. These can be great places to spot gaps in the literature or areas that feel underexplored. But previous studies and manuals aren't the only places where you might find inspiration. Sometimes, just exploring a corpus, revisiting assignments, or thinking of an unusual expression you read might spark an idea that grows into a research project. Once you've chosen a general topic, the next step is to get familiar with what other researchers have said about it. This helps you understand the broader conversation around your subject and avoid reinventing the wheel. It helps you narrow your focus and gives you ideas about the methods and resources that you might use. And that is precisely what I did in my research. I chose semantic prosody as my focus since I had studied it as a concept and observed it in previous studies and in corpora. While it's well researched in English, I realized that cross-linguistic studies were still limited. This led me to apply to the concept of near synonyms across languages, a topic that had been mentioned in class for its relevance to multilingual language users. In linguistics, near synonyms are items with similar cognitive meanings but different usage patterns. This means they cannot be universally substituted without subtly changing the effect of my words. In my study, I wanted to find out how a given set of near synonyms behave in different languages and whether the evaluative nuances they convey in English are also observable in a related language like German. To do this, I focused on two sets of expressions that relate to the concept of consequence, some of which had already been analyzed in earlier studies. So, rather than starting from scratch, I built on existing research and extended it by adding a new cross-linguistic dimension. This led me to my research question. Does the semantic prosody of a set of English near synonyms also appear in their German counterparts? A good research question doesn't have to be overcomplicated, but it should be clear and specific enough to get the rest of your research, from selecting data to analyzing results. As we shall see in a moment, even such a simple question needs to be made more explicit by detailing its features. These methodological decisions usually result from a process of trial and error, so don't expect them to be straightforward as they appear in published work. Your corpus should reflect the focus of your study and avoid introducing bias or skew. I used the British National Corpus for English and the Deveda S. Kent Corpus for German. These were a good fit for contrastive analysis because they align well in time span, text types, and size. They are also both reference corpora, designed for general-purpose linguistic research and well-suited for drawing balanced conclusions. In other words, they can be considered reasonably comparable and adequate for the purposes of my study, which aim to avoid a focus on one specific topic or text type. Even the choice of candidates to be analyzed depends on the scope of your study. If you are planning to locate your piece of research within the field of lexicography, you might want to start from bilingual dictionary entries. Alternatively, you can also use parallel corpora to identify translation candidates and see how they align with native use. The next step is deciding how to approach your data. The same phenomenon can be studied through different lenses. Regardless of your method, what matters most is that your criteria are clear, consistent, and well justified. To examine semantic prosody, I opted for concordance analysis, reading through keywords in context. The idea here is that rather than relying on collocate lists, which can be misleading without context, you manually examine the meaning and tone of each item. Because the initial queries returned many results, I randomly sampled 100 lines per item. This amount was a trade-off between manageability and reliability, meaning that I analyzed fewer instances but more in depth. I categorized each occurrence as favorable, unfavorable, or neutral. Although this is a standard practice in the field, it is easier said than done, as you will know if you've ever attempted to infer the intention of a speaker without being actually part of the original interaction. Once you've analyzed your data, the next step is to present your results. At this stage, your goal is to show what the data looks like, not why you think it looks that way. In other words, you should refrain from interpretation. This helps your audience follow your thinking step by step. In my case, I reported results by offering representative examples with comments first, and then used a summary table to show the distribution of semantic prosody across each near synonym. Graphics are always helpful in visualizing overall trends, but make sure you choose the appropriate one for the type of data you are working with. For cases like mine, where you compare the frequency of nominal categories, bar charts and mosaic graphs will do. It's important to remember that results don't simply emerge from data. They are shaped by the choices you make, what you include, how you sample, and how you define categories. Making sense of data is never automatic. That's why it's good practice to present your full results first as neutrally as possible before offering your overall interpretation. Interpretation is part of the discussion section, which is sometimes merged with results for the sake of conciseness, as in my paper. This is where I linked my findings back to my research question and connected them to the existing literature. Remember that a good discussion doesn't just summarize, but explains what results mean and why they matter. The final step in drafting your work is writing conclusions. Conclusions are usually the results of a gradual process of synthesis, where the patterns you identified in discussion are distilled into key takeaways. Here, I clarify the insights my study offers and reflected on the implications for practice. And that's your task now. As you go through the abstract, you'll evaluate whether all these elements are in place. Is the topic clearly motivated? Is the method sound? Are the results presented fairly? And is the interpretation grounded in the data? As you assess the abstract, the peer evaluation grid we provide you with will help you to reflect not just on my work, but also on how you might approach your own research in the future.